Hello everybody, today you're watching the Tropics topics of September the 12th, 2018. I apologize for the lack of an update yesterday. My recording software stopped working for some reason. But today it's working again, and we have a lot of activity, as you can clearly tell. We have 6 individual systems that we're going to have to monitor, 5 that are currently active. This is, folks, you rarely see this, even during September. This is quite incredible. Let's go from the most threatening to the least threatening. So starting with Hurricane Florence here, which is now a Category 3 hurricane, winds of 120 miles per hour, moving towards the Carolinas. We'll go in depth into the system towards the end of the update. We also have Tropical Storm Isaac here, with winds of 60 miles per hour, pressure of 1,003 millibars, moving towards the Lesser Antilles. It will likely impact those islands tomorrow. Hurricane Helene, which is a Category 1, moving off towards the north, that may eventually threaten the Azores later on. Newly formed Subtropical Storm Joyce, which is out here in the North Atlantic, very weak, probably won't be very strong to end off its life. And then Invest 95L here, which has a high chance, 70%, of developing in the next 5 days as it moves towards Texas and will likely impact there sometime on Friday or Saturday, in addition to this other area of disturbed weather that we may have to monitor for future tropical cyclone genesis, but that's further on down the line. So here's the wide shot of the whole Atlantic basin. We can see all of our storms here, all 5 systems that are currently active: Florence, Joyce, Helene, Isaac, and 95L. We are going to start off with the 2 that are threatening the land the least, Subtropical Storm Joyce and Hurricane Helene. Here's a wide shot of both of these storms. Joyce just formed a few hours ago, currently a subtropical cyclone because it is coupled with a upper level low, which is causing it to undergo baroclinic interactions, which is causing a more subtropical kind of feel to the cyclone, even though phase diagrams do suggest that the storm does have a tropical warm core, meaning that, it still has vigorous convection regardless. And of course, Helene down here, not as well defined as it has been in the past few days. It is no longer has a visible eye feature, but it is still a hurricane, a Category 1 at that, as it progresses off towards the north. Here's National Hurricane Center forecast for Helene, showing it moving off towards the north over the next few days, and by Saturday it may try to impact the western portion of the Azores, which could bring some tropical storm force winds and inclement weather to these islands as well. And Joyce over here is just going to curve towards the southwest and then curve in behind Helene once it's up here, and it may also try to impact the Azores later on, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. So that's Helene and Joyce. Here is Tropical Storm Isaac here. Very disorganized today, obviously. You can see no convection over the low-level center here, which is outracing all of the convection over here. This storm is really booking it towards the west now. And but it still does have 60 mile per hour winds, as aircraft reconnaissance went in there earlier today and found those winds at the surface, and therefore it is still considered a tropical storm with 60 mile an hour winds. But we can see here that all this convection on the east side is going to be, basically be staying there as this continues towards the west, towards the Lesser Antilles, probably going to impact either Guadeloupe or Dominica as a weakening tropical storm, and anywhere basically at or north of the point where the storm moves through is going to see the highest winds, probably up to tropical storm force, and potentially gusts a bit higher, maybe not the hurricane force, but still relatively high, and then all the rainfall probably coming in after the center moves through, so you could still see some pretty significant rainfall and some potential flooding from Isaac as it moves through. Now, longer range just is a little bit more uncertain because, as you can see here in the GFS model, it has a tropical cyclone just to the south of Cuba, and that is coming from Isaac, and that is shown a bit more in more of the dynamical models, including the GFS, the HWRF, and some other global models as well. So this is something that we're going to have to pay attention to, but this is going to depend a lot on how strong Isaac is over the next couple of days, and you can see right now not looking particularly strong. Here's the National Hurricane Center forecast for Isaac. Tropical storm warnings are in effect for Guadeloupe down to Martinique, and watches for some of the leeward islands, including Barbuda, Antigua, St. Kitts, and up here into Anguilla and St. Martin. And this is as Isaac moves towards the west. You can see here it's still a tropical storm out here near Jamaica. Now, this portion out here in the forecast is noted to be relatively low confidence because of the potential that it could be even a bit stronger, and therefore could be on the further north and potentially be impacting Jamaica, Cuba, or maybe even Haiti. But this is longer range, and it's very uncertain at this point. It all depends on how strong Isaac is when it moves through the Caribbean. So right now, this is our best guess as to what Isaac's track will be, but this can change over the next few days. Moving on to Invest 95L here, we can see it is more consolidated than it was in the last update. We actually have convection here across the entire Gulf of Mexico, but the low-level vorticity is still relatively broad and hasn't really confined yet into an actual closed center. But there is still some wind shear coming here. As you can see, these clouds right here are being blown off towards the south because there is, remember that upper trough I was mentioning, it's very thin and very weak, but it's currently splitting the system almost into like a 2/3 over here and a 1/3 over here, basically cutting it off right there, and that's inducing some wind shear onto 95L. Now, as the system continues to progress off towards the northwest, this trough will back off towards this portion of the Bay of Campeche and allow more favorable wind shear in this portion of the basin. So it is possible, likely at this point, that we will be seeing a tropical depression or tropical storm forming in this portion of the Gulf of Mexico, and then potentially moving into somewhere along the Texas Gulf Coast, bringing with it probably just a lot of rainfall. It's not going to be a huge wind event for this portion of the basin. So we see here in some of the computer models, there's not a lot because some of them are having a harder time actually depicting the actual broad center. But you can see here a lot of the dynamical models, all of them want to bring it somewhere in the Texas Gulf Coast, in between basically Brownsville and then up here to Rockport, Corpus Christi, the same area that got slammed last year by Hurricane Harvey. This is going to be nothing to the caliber of Harvey, I can assure you that. It's probably not even going to be a hurricane. It might not even be a tropical cyclone when it moves inland. But regardless of formation, this is going to be a big rain event for this portion of the country. As we can see here in the WPC forecast, we have rainfall totals here expected about 3 inches over a wide area with some isolated higher amounts, possibly up to 5 inches close towards the coastline. There's a bullseye right there and around Port Aransas, Rockport, and up to Fulton, that area, and even further inland towards San Antonio, Laredo, Del Rio, you could still see quite a bit of rainfall on top of what you've already seen this month, which has been quite a bit of rainfall, especially across the entire state. We've seen a lot of rain over the past 2 weeks, and this is only going to increase once 95L moves in. And if this does get named over the next 2 days, 3 days, which it likely will at this point, it will gain the name Kirk now that Joyce has been named over the northeastern Atlantic. And we can also see here this big bullseye over North Carolina and South Carolina. That is due to Hurricane Florence, which I'm going to discuss now. And this storm is still very intense, currently Category 3, winds of 120 miles per hour. This is a little lower than we were expecting it to be at this point, but still, it is still a very intense hurricane. You can see in the actual imagery here, it doesn't look too well defined. The eye is a little bit ragged here, and it isn't perfectly circular, and even the convection around it isn't very symmetric either, because we can see here in this microwave pass, we can see that the whole southeastern side of the eye wall is completely open on that portion, which is allowing in a lot of dry air and not allowing the storm to really get its symmetry together, which is causing the convection over here to really not be able to become much more better defined than it currently is now. But as we can see here, this thing is approaching the North Carolina coastline and will likely start moving towards the coastline, which it currently is right now. We'll likely start seeing impacts sometime tonight. As we can see here, the only thing over the state right now is just some outer cirrus bands associated with the upper anticyclone, but that is about it. Even a few thunderstorms here actually beginning to blow up over North Carolina in association to an extent with Florence. And as this continues to move towards the west, there is still, and it might sound a little bit weird, but there is still some forecasting uncertainty, because as we can see here in the European model, here's Florence here on the run, and you see this huge ridge over here towards the north and the east of the system. This is what's currently steering it off in this direction right now. And as we get into tomorrow, this is Thursday morning, tomorrow morning, you can see here the ridge is a little bit smaller here, but still located towards the east of the system, which is currently being driven basically into this portion of North Carolina. It's pretty much guaranteed it's going to make landfall, or at least have the eye wall on shore somewhere between Myrtle Beach and basically Morehead City up here, probably near the Wilmington area is my best guess at this point. But this is Thursday morning. As you can see here, here's the storm, and we have this little bit of ridging starting to build out here over the Midwest into the Great Lakes region. Now what this is going to do this is going to cause Florence to kind of slow down a little bit. You can see that here. Here is all the way over here on this portion of the run. Here it is right now, and then you can kind of see it starts to slow down a little bit as it approaches the North Carolina coastline. This is Friday morning right here. As we can see, Florence is just offshore, but just barely. The eye wall is scraping the coastline, and the ridging over here in this portion of the country is starting to kind of build down a little bit. We can even see here that there is a little close isohypsy just to the west of the storm, which is going to cause it to actually kind of take a little bit of a southwest dip. So it's possible, in fact probable at this point, the storm moves up to this portion of the Carolinas and then starts to kind of take a bit of a southwest dip here, potentially making landfall on this portion of North Carolina. I think it's Cape Baldhead, I believe it's called. And it's possible that happens, but that really won't matter. That will just impact the Wilmington area, cause impacts to increase in that area. But then, as you can see here, moving southwest because of this ridging really building up here in the upper Midwest, Great Lakes region, that's going to cause it to drift southwest in the South Carolina, potentially on this run, making landfall kind of near McClellanville, and then moving further inland, that's over Charleston. This is Sunday morning, and it's Wednesday right now. The storm is still over the region. And then even Monday, it's over extreme eastern Georgia, and then finally starts to kick off towards the north. But during this time, it's going to be causing a significant amount of impacts, regardless of the landfall category. If it doesn't make landfall in this portion, it ends up making landfall in South Carolina's Category 1, that's not going to hamper any impacts at all. And I mean, we really don't even know this storm is going to make landfall exactly because we see here in the model tracks, it's kind of hard to see, so I'm just going to zoom in really quickly for you guys. As we can see here, they're still kind of all over the place a little bit, exactly what's going to happen. A change in about 10 miles is going to be crucial for this area of North Carolina around Wilmington as to whether or not they will be seeing storm surge levels of 3 feet to possibly 13 feet. It's very hard to say at this point because of these potential subtleties in the track of subtle track differences in Florence here as it approaches the coastline. But bottom line, this thing is expected to come in as a strong hurricane, a powerful hurricane, a dangerous hurricane, and is going to be causing potential life-threatening impacts throughout the region. As we can see here in the National Hurricane Center forecast cone, you can see how big the wind field is, how wide the actual extent of tropical storm force winds is. And this is going to be this size or maybe even a bit bigger by the time it gets to this portion of North Carolina. So you can just translate this over into this portion of the coastline, and you can see how expansive this thing could possibly or probably be by the time it gets here. And warnings are up accordingly. Hurricane warnings in effect basically from McClellanville all the way up to about Duck in North Carolina, and even these hurricane warnings are probably going to be extended south past Charleston, potentially to Hilton Head by potentially tomorrow, maybe even Friday, as the storm approaches land. As we can see here in the forecast, it also starts to slow down a lot. You can see these M points right here, M standing for major hurricane, Category 3 or higher, are getting closer and closer together as it gets closer and closer towards the coastline. So here we are, 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon. The storm hasn't made exactly, it's pretty much right on shore, just south of Wilmington, which will be causing a huge amount of surge into that area of the coastline. But then, as we can see here, by Saturday, it starts to take a bit of a west-southwest dip into South Carolina and then starts to kick out by Sunday and Monday, all the while being a huge storm for this region. As we can see here, this is the most likely arrival of tropical storm force winds. So, in general, you are most likely to start seeing tropical storm force winds in potentially the Outer Banks by 8 a.m. tomorrow, further inland towards Wilmington, Fayetteville, up into the Pamlico Sound by 2 p.m. tomorrow, eventually reaching into South Carolina by 8 p.m. tomorrow, and and you can see the rest of these probabilities and timings here. It's pretty much guaranteed at this point that we're going to be seeing tropical storm force winds. It's a no-brainer at this point that that's going to be the case with Florence. Now, it's not just going to be a wind event; it's also going to be a storm surge and rain event. As you can see here, this is the WPC forecast, more in-depth than the one I showed with 95L. You can see here a huge bullseye right here of 20 inches from basically Myrtle Beach up to this portion of the Outer Banks, and this area could see 20 plus inches of rain. 30 inches, certainly possible in some of these areas, because this storm is not going to be moving very fast at all in the next 5 days, basically. And even further inland, there could be significant rainfall totals extending into South Carolina, up here across the Appalachians, up here into North Carolina, up in, even to Virginia. There could be rainfall totals up to or even exceeding 6 inches. So this is going to be a prolonged threat, and even up here into Pennsylvania and southern New York as the storm begins to kick on out. Um, but in addition to rainfall, flooding, there's going to be storm surge flooding, and quite a bit of it in some areas. Again, this is really dependent on where the storm exactly tracks, but there is a good possibility that a lot of these areas could be seeing storm surge levels as high as 10, 11, potentially even up to 13 feet, and according to some of the predictions from both the National Hurricane Center and some of the models. This could be a significant storm surge threat, folks. Storm surge is really the main threat when it comes to landfalling hurricanes. I know wind is usually what is associated with hurricanes, but water is much deadlier than hurricanes. 9 out of 10, much deadlier than wind. 9 out of 10 deaths from hurricanes come from the water, from either storm surge flooding or inland flooding from rainfall. And storm surge is not just a coastal thing, is it? I mean, yeah, it's based around the coast, but it's not a beachfront thing. It can extend, blocks, miles inland, in fact, depending on, the topography and the land exactly. But this could be a serious storm surge situation. It's not just along the landfall points. We can see here up into the Pamlico Sound, further up into the rivers, you can see storm surge levels, very high. Anything anywhere in the red is basically above 9 feet. Orange is 6 feet or greater. Yellow is 3 feet or greater. Blue is 1 feet or greater, 1 foot or greater. But still, this is significant storm surge. And if it does actually start to kind of drift off towards the southwest, these predictions up here near Myrtle Beach may just have to be increased a little bit based on everything the storm is doing. And this is why, over 1 million people have been evacuated in North Carolina. Not all of them from the coastline, but 1 million people in North Carolina, most of them have been evacuated due to storm surge. There are mandatory evacuations in place for some of these counties, and rightfully so, based on what Florence is doing so far, and even further inland from heavy rainfall. Nowhere in the state is going to be left unscathed from Florence, I am afraid to say. Even down in South Carolina and Virginia, there's not really going to be anywhere that goes unscathed from Florence. So that's the deal with Florence right now and the Atlantic. But I want to also discuss one other system that's going on right now. Typhoon Mangkhut. I mean, this thing looks incredible on the satellite imagery. This is a Category 5 super typhoon, winds of 180. Yes, 180 miles per hour. Central pressure is below 900 millibars. This is the first typhoon to do that in about exactly 2 years, basically. And this storm is going to be progressing off towards the west-northwest, and is going to eventually impact northern Luzon as potentially a super typhoon. Doesn't have to be this. It's not going to be the strongest it impacts, but it could be pretty close. You can see here in the forecast from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, right here in this point right here, just off of northeast Luzon. That has winds of 155 miles per hour, 135 knots, and this is going to be moving into this portion of the Philippines. And the good news is not a lot of people live along this portion of the coastline, but if you do, you need to get out of the area now, because this Typhoon Mangkhut right here is going to be a huge storm for this portion of the coastline. And it's not just the Philippines either. See, later on in the forecast, it's moving into southern China, near this peninsula that extends down to Hainan Island. I don't know the exact name. I apologize for that. But even then, once it makes landfall in this portion of China, it could still be a Category 2 typhoon. So weaker, but still pretty significant in this portion of the basin. So it's not just the Atlantic that's seeing a lot of activity right now. It's the Western Pacific as well. And that's in addition to Tropical Storm Olivia, which just made landfall in Hawaii today as a weak tropical storm. Bringing a lot of rain to the islands, and it's not really worth discussing at this point, to be honest with you guys. But it's still a very active day in the tropics as a whole. Mostly in the Atlantic, though, where we still have, again, 5 systems active, 4 named storms, potentially 5 if 95L can get its act together. And, very busy time in the tropics, dangerous storm. Florence about to approach. Carolinas is probably going to be a catastrophic storm for some areas, and will be potentially a life-changing storm in some areas. Again, Isaac moving through the Lesser Antilles will be bringing a bunch of heavy rain with it, gusty winds, and potentially some damage to structures from areas that were severely impacted last year by Hurricanes Irma and Maria particularly in Dominica and even up to Puerto Rico. And then Helene and Joyce appear, probably going to be affecting the Azores later on down the line this weekend. And of course, 95L moving towards the Texas coast, going to be a big rainmaker for that area of the country. All right, we're finished here. Busy time. This is over 20 minutes long, so thank you for bearing with me through this. So thank you very much for watching, and especially during this time, remember to stay weather alert during this time.